Hey guys, you can now support this show and make your life 50% better by going to patreon.com/The System Is Down and signing up for the Downers Club, where you're going to get access to a plethora of wild, crazy, and often offensive bonus audio and video episodes of the show on a weekly basis. For more information, just go to patreon.com/The System Is Down. The following is a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
Welcome to the System Is Down.
Hello, and happy Labor Day. I trust that you're having a great one. I don't know what you do in your free time on your long weekend. If you are having a long weekend, perhaps you're spending time with your family, perhaps you're smoking various varieties of meats, perhaps you're playing some sort of game of croquet or something to that effect. Whatever the circumstance, thank you for tuning into the show, and I hope it makes your Labor Day just that much better than it already was. And if you're one of the people that have to work on Labor Day, I sympathize with you, and I hope that this, makes it a bearable one. But what's up, Downers? Welcome back to the least comfortable show on the web, The System Is Down, the place where we talk about all the uncomfortable topics, like conspiracies, politics, and religion. All the things that, as you're getting together for, a dinner or something on Labor Day, getting together with maybe extended family, those topics that that they're just praying you don't bring up again because they don't want to hear about it. But I trust that you as Downers will do your right and noble service of bringing up these topics and making people uncomfortable. Anyway, my name's Dan Smots, and if you're new here, welcome to the show. Please go find the person who invited you and give them a big kiss on the mouth and a slap on the rear from you and I, because you will enjoy this, I guarantee it. I guarantee it, or your money back. If there had to be a question of the day, the obvious question of the day for this episode would be the title of the episode. What the fuck is going on in Afghanistan? What is going on in Afghanistan? We're coming up on the 17th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, and we are still in Afghanistan. Bin Laden's been dead for a couple years, and we're still in Afghanistan. Why? Why are we there? And I don't feel like enough people are asking this question, and probably the reason why not enough people are asking it is because they don't know that we're even there, or they don't think about the fact that this is such a ridiculously long amount of time, and we don't know why we're there. If you want to know why we're still there, there's nobody better on this topic than the great Scott Horton. Scott Horton has written books and done lectures and done podcasts and all number of things exposing what really is happening in Afghanistan. And we're going to jump into that conversation that I had with him here in just a moment, but we've got some announcements, some new announcements, not just, hey, go join the Downers Club announcements, but, go join the Downers Club. Patreon.com/The System Is Down. That's the way we keep this show going. That's the way we keep expanding things. And one of the ways that we are expanding and making things bigger and better is we just added a new public show to The System Is Down. It is called The Anti-News. It's where Craig and I cover current events and things that are happening in the world, and we do so with our own dark comedic twist, I suppose you could say. Not only that, but we are doing the Anti-News as a live broadcast now. We are planning on doing it every Monday night at 9 o'clock Central Standard Time. But wait, there's more. It's not just a live show. It is a live call-in show. We now have the ability to take your calls live on the air, and you can throw out questions and add to the conversation and be a part of the show. And then that broadcast, the recording of it, will go up in the main feed here on Wednesday mornings. So I'll just go ahead and tell you now. You can call into the show right now at 309-716-3818. And if you aren't able to make it to the live broadcast, you can leave us a voicemail at that number, and we will take your questions, comments, stories, or what have you. So it's a lot of fun. We're expanding. As I keep saying that we have plans to expand. This is just one of them. Our quality is getting better and better every single week. We're figuring out new ways to do new things to get the word out there about the show and just make it a better experience for you guys. And again, the reason why we're able to do these expansions is because of you guys. You guys in the Downers Club who are supporting members of the show. So if you would like to support the show, go over to patreon.com/The System Is Down, and you'll get a bunch of bonus content every week. After the live broadcast that we do for the public, we switch over and do a top secret after party just for the Downers Club, which is also live, and you can call into that as well. So a lot of fun things happening, a lot of really exciting things that I hope you guys are enjoying. Okay, so check all that out. Check out the Anti-News Live. Check out the Downers Club on Patreon. And also go check out our sponsor, the 29 Toes Podcast. The 29 Toes Podcast is I would say a completely different show than what you're getting from The System Is Down. It might be a polar opposite because the 29 Toes Podcast is three guys in a room drinking and just chatting about what comes up. They talk about movies, talk about guy stuff, just whatever happens. It's a really chill, laid-back show. So go check out the 29 Toes Podcast, wherever podcasts are sold. Those guys are a lot of fun, and they are, keeping this show going. So check them out. All right, let's get into my conversation with the great Scott Horton on what the f*** is going on in Afghanistan. Let's get weird. My guest today is author, podcaster, award-winning radio host, documentarian, historian, all-around fascinating individual, Scott Horton. And I could go on with the credentials, but Scott, is there anything that you don't do?
I don't know. Lots of things that I don't do.
Yeah.
I don't ride a bike, man. I ride a skateboard.
All right. Well, we'll cut that out. So, Scott, thank you so much for being here. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good.
Good.
You don't have to cut out anything. It'll be fine.
I was joking. It's fine. I wanted to have you on the show. We have mutual friends in the libertarian sphere, and I was alerted to some of your stuff. We were doing recaps of like the Waco miniseries back when that was going on, and I was turned on to your show with your episode with David Thibodeau. Started digging more into your background and some of the other things that you've got going on, and it's fascinating work, man. I absolutely love it.
Oh, thanks very much. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. What I want to go over today is, you're an author of the book Fool's Errand, which is all about the Afghanistan war and all that. To be completely honest, I don't know a whole lot about the Afghanistan war, and I don't think a whole lot of people do. And I wanted to have you on to just kind of, you are able to dig into this way deeper than anybody that I've ever heard speak on the topic, but I want to get kind of Afghanistan 101, Afghanistan for Dummies take on this, because I think it's really important. We've been in this war for, 17 years now, and I still don't know why we're there. So if you want to go ahead and dig into that a little bit, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, hey, can we start with how unfair it is that they never even tell you what it's about?
Yeah.
You basically can't really find out on TV. If you watch anything on TV about Afghanistan, it'll be, stories of brave soldiers jumping off of helicopters with rifles in hand to do brave things, but without context, right? Without really explaining what's going on. And we saw this also in Iraq War II, where the whole frame was, it's us and the Iraqi people versus the terrorists who are trying to thwart democracy. So they never explained, obviously that's nonsense, but they never explained, who is who and whose side are we on and why are we doing what we're doing and who's benefiting from that and whatever, where anyone could be expected to have, a reasonable take without really having to delve into it. It's sort of the same thing with domestic politics too, where they report on the horse race of the election, but they never explain why you would choose one or the other. Sure. What's the difference between them anyway? They never tell you,
Absolutely. Now, real quick, before you get into it, I want to clarify because our show, we cover conspiracies, politics, and religion and all that stuff. I want to make sure everybody knows you are not, you're not into the conspiracy side of 9/11 and stuff like that, right?
Well, I was a lot more of a New World Order kook before all this happened.
Sure.
In the 1990s, I had actually predicted 9/11 for a long time because it was pretty obvious what was going on and that Bush Jr. was going to come to power and go to war in Iraq and all of that. Mm-hmm. And, really, I think what happened was I saw the truther movement after 9/11 really cherry picking out stuff to try to build a case to make themselves seem right in exactly the same way that the neoconservative movement was trying to cherry pick all this stuff to frame Saddam Hussein. Mm-hmm. And the frame of argument was the same. And it was, let's start with my conclusion is that the New World Order did it. And then now let's figure out how they did it. Or Saddam did it. And now the question is how we figure out a way to make it seem like Saddam did it in the same kind of way. And so I just decided to kind of wait. And the more I learned about it, the more I learned that Al-Qaeda really is a thing separate from the CIA. And, I admit, I'm happy to admit that to this day, I'm fairly somewhat suspicious, I guess, about, seeming blind eyes turned to the upcoming attack, which was widely predicted inside and outside the government. I wasn't that special in that regard. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think a lot of those things can be explained away with lesser scandals, such as just how much the CIA didn't tell the FBI or wouldn't allow the FBI to know. And for the same, at the same time, what the NSA wouldn't share. Mm-hmm. Michael Hayden, the great hero of the resistance. Well, he was the head of the NSA and he wouldn't share anything with the CIA or the FBI at the same time too. In fact, there's a great anecdote by Ali Soufan, who was the head FBI investigator on Al-Qaeda, who was in Yemen at the time investigating the Cole bombing. And then on the day of the 9/11 attack, they called him into the embassy to the CIA station there, and they opened up a manila folder, and there was the Malaysia meeting. And there was basically half the Malaysia meeting was the Cole plot, and the other half of the Malaysia meeting was the 9/11 plot. Mm. And he looked at it and went, it was right there this whole time. These guys had it the whole time, but the FBI had their information locked up behind the grand jury where the CIA couldn't get to it, and the CIA didn't want to share anything with them. And then, of course, the NSA, again, keeping things from both. So, I think that can explain most of it. And also, the Bush administration, when the CIA was telling the Bush people, hey, there's an Al-Qaeda problem and we got to deal with it, hair on fire, quote unquote. Paul Wolfowitz and the neocons were telling Bush, it's a distraction. Don't let those stupid CIA guys distract you from Saddam. He's the real prize. And we don't want to get bogged down in Afghanistan, boss, before we get a chance to do the big one. And so that was kind of their way of looking at it. So I don't want to explain it away like they're innocent. And it's still 3,000 counts of criminally negligent homicide. But, it turns out that virtually all of the factoids built by the conspiracy theorists at that time to prove their case, none of that panned out. The explosives in the buildings, the missile hit the Pentagon, and all the the faked calls home and all this stuff, the loose change stuff, none of that panned out at all. And so, if 99.9% of the facts behind the case don't actually stand up on their own, then the case doesn't either. That's my overall take. And by the way, I never read the 9/11 Commission report. I'm not just taking, whatever they tortured out of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's word for it. But I have read quite a few books about it and talked to some good journalists and stuff. So that's right.
Right on, man. Yeah, and we can maybe dig into that a little bit later.
Stuff behind on the New World Order thing, and I really was a one world government guy too. Not for it, but I thought that was the game and the grand strategy and all that until really. And I was really a last holdout even. Me and Will Grigg from the John Birch Society both, I think, got over it right around the same time when they invaded Iraq in 2003. And that clearly was just not a UN nation-building exercise for the baby blue flag. It just wasn't. If it had been, they would have done everything possible, everything they had to do to get the Russians and the French and the Chinese to agree and to vote for it on the Security Council. And they just didn't. That wasn't the agenda. And I had to admit at that time that I really should have figured it out when they bombed Serbia over Russia's dead body over Kosovo in 99, that whole one world government, one world army, Russia joins NATO and all of that. It just didn't happen. It wasn't where things were going at all. And Dick Cheney, he had no regard for the United Nations Security Council at all. He had the National Security Council. What did he need them for? And that was the whole point of view of the neocons and the nationalists in the Bush administration. So at that point, that was when I quit being a conspiracy theorist and just became a critic of the American empire, because that's really where it's at anyway.
Right on, man. Absolutely. So yeah, let's jump back to, the top, what led up to 9/11. And, I mean, this is basically just a factual, not conspiracy theories or anything. I started your book the other day, found it on Audible. Otherwise I would have started it much earlier. I'm not much of a reader, so thanks for putting it on Audible. But I'm about a third of the way through, and it's very fascinating stuff. So why don't you just start from the beginning, just like what led up to this incident?
Yeah. Well, so that's the whole first chapter of the book, is getting into this mess. And, I'm trying to take on, hopefully sort of once and for all, this myth that, well, they hate us because they're Muslims and Islam makes men hate freedom.
Right.
And so they came to attack us because of how free we are. And by the way, how innocent and wonderful too. And the better humans we are, the more they hate us. And so this implacable, irrational Muslim, Islamic extremist enemy must be destroyed. And we got to fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here, and all these false tropes, basically, of the terror war. This is just not right at all. It just has, almost nothing to do with the truth whatsoever. I mean, the bin Ladenites are radical Islamists, and that does help, define their personality and their agenda. But it doesn't explain their behavior in the sense of what it is that they have against us, and or for that matter, even what they're doing in the Middle East. If you took the Americans out of the equation there. Mm-hmm. So, but I'll try to do the long and the short of it here, is that in 1953, America overthrew the government of Iran, the democratically elected government of Iran, and installed the Shah, the dictator there. Well, 26 years later, there was a revolution in Iran. They rose up and overthrew him. And right at the time that Saddam Hussein was doing a coup d'etat and seizing power in Iraq, by the way. Mm-hmm. But during this revolution in Iran, which the CIA and the State Department welcomed at first, because the Ayatollah Khomeini actually had helped them overthrow the government before, back in 1953, there was a riot and hostages were seized at the embassy, and it all became this big crisis. And so in response, Jimmy Carter hired Saddam Hussein, basically gave Saddam Hussein the green light. He had his own motives too, of course, to attack Iran. At the same time, the same year, 1979, Jimmy Carter authorized the CIA to start backing the holy warriors of Afghanistan. And this came to include a lot of Arabs from all around the Middle East who traveled to Afghanistan to fight, in order to lure the Soviet Union into getting bogged down in a no-win Vietnam-style quagmire, in order to break their bank as a covert action by the CIA, Operation Cyclone there. And both of these policies were inherited by Ronald Reagan and continued. And that included, of course, backing Saddam in the war to contain the Iranian Revolution. Now, part of that was because the supermajority population of Iraq are Shiite Arabs, 60%. And in the east and the south of the country, and all the land from Baghdad to Iran, from Baghdad down to Kuwait, that's the predominantly Shiite section of the country. And Saddam was afraid that the Iranian Shiite revolution was not an Iranian nationalist revolution, or it was, in part. It was a Shiite-based revolution, and he was afraid it was going to roll right into Iraq. So he conscripted all those Shiites, put rifles in their hands, and sent them to war against Iran. And so that was a big part of his motivation, was, having national sect triumph over the shorter one, the religious one. And so America backed that war. It lasted all through the 1980s. About 500,000 were killed on each side and all of that. And at the same time, the war was waged in Afghanistan. The Russians, the Soviets killed, approximately 1 million Afghans were killed in that war, which did succeed in bogging them down and bringing them to bankruptcy. Then at the end of the Iran-Iraq war, in the George H.W. Bush years, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And, it's too complicated really to get into what was behind this. Sure. But, basically they were calling in all their loans, so the money they'd loaned him to fight the war, as he saw it, on their behalf against Iran. And now they were being ruthless in calling in their loans. And it wasn't just them. It was the Saudis and the UAE and the rest. And they were overproducing from shared oil wells on the border. The Kuwaitis were. And so the Americans actually gave Saddam basically a green light. You might call it a flashing yellow light, but it was, made clear by the American ambassador, April Glaspie, that we would not intervene if Saddam rolled into Kuwait. Now, she later said to the New York Times, well, no one thought he was going to take the whole country. In other words, he was supposed to occupy the northern oil fields as punishment for their intransigence, basically. But then he kind of got carried away and took the whole city and looted Kuwait City, took the whole country, and looted Kuwait City and went all the way to the sea and reclaimed Iraq's 19th province and all this stuff. And so then that became the excuse for Iraq War I. And they could have negotiated him out of there. But once they started building up in the Persian Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, there was no backing down from that. This was going to be an exercise of American power to cure the Vietnam syndrome and show everybody that USA is number one. We're back in business and all this stuff. And they said that all at the time. To destroy that Vietnam syndrome, that reluctance of the American people to go out on adventurous wars against countries that never attacked us.
Right.
And so at that time, our friends, the Mujahideen from Afghanistan, the Arab Afghan Mujahideen from Afghanistan, including Osama bin Laden, started to turn on us because they wanted to kick Saddam out of Kuwait and keep the Americans out of the Arabian Peninsula. Then when Iraq War I was over, George H.W. Bush encouraged the Shiite supermajority there, as well as the Kurdish minority up in the north, to rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein. But then they panicked and they realized that they were making a mistake, that they were reversing the Ronald Reagan policy of supporting Saddam to contain the Iranian Revolution. They were now importing the Iranian Revolution into Iraq. And including Iraqis who had taken Iran's side in the war were leading the militias and coming across. So they choked and they stabbed them all in the back. And they let Saddam keep his tanks and his attack helicopters, and he massacred more than 100,000 people in putting down that uprising. It was the Great Bay of Pigs of the Desert of 1991. It took place about 5-6 weeks after the end of Iraq War I in the spring of 1991. So then that became the excuse to stay. And George H.W. Bush stayed, and then Bill Clinton came into power, and they stayed in Saudi Arabia to enforce this policy of dual containment against Iraq in the name of, a pretension that they thought he still had weapons of mass destruction when they knew that he didn't. And on the pretension of protecting the Shiites and the Kurds with these no-fly zones over Iraq waged from bases in the United States, and of course enforcing the blockade and the UN sanctions against Iraq in the name of the weapons and ultimately outright in the name of regime change, where the Americans announced they would keep the sanctions as long as Saddam Hussein was in power, which proved to be true. And that was along with American support for Israel and their wars in Lebanon and, of course, against the Palestinians on the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. These became the single animating factors of the al-Qaeda war against the United States. And from the first World Trade Center bombing, the first real al-Qaeda attack in America, proto-al-Qaeda, was the assassination of Rabbi Kahane, a right-wing nationalist rabbi in New York, who the Israeli Supreme Court had banned his political party for being, quote, fascist, in their words. And he was one of these guys who wanted to completely annex and ethnically cleanse the entire West Bank and kick all the last of the Palestinians out of historic Palestine. And he was assassinated in New York in 1990. And then, of course, was the first World Trade Center bombing and the UN and the tunnel plots. And then there was the Khobar Towers attack, which was wrongfully blamed on Iran. And this is important. In 1996, previously, Americans have been attacked at a training base where they were training Saudi National Guardsmen, basically the internal police there. Then next was this Khobar Towers attack in 96, where 19 American airmen were killed. And This was Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed were the ones who were behind it. But at the time, they blamed it on Iran for basically political reasons, because that's what the Saudis claimed, and they didn't really want to fight about it. And everybody likes blaming things on Iran. And so the American people, were deprived. They lost the 19 airmen, but they were deprived of the purpose and the lesson behind that. They should have seen that these are right-wing, rabid Saudi nationalists who want us the hell off of their land. Look at what they've done. They bombed our airmen who are bombing Iraq from these bases in their country. And even if the princes say it's okay, somebody's upset. But that narrative never came through because it was all muddled in this, dual containment policy. So we can never make friends with Iraq or Iran again. Forget offshore balancing or any of these things. We have to stay in Saudi to contain them both forever. And that was the policy that, again, first and foremost, motivated al-Qaeda. And I want to say importantly here that, if you think of Osama bin Laden as just Lex Luthor, the master criminal, nihilist,
right,
murderer for murder's sake, then that's fine. Like, you know what I mean? I don't want to say like, here's a very reasonable man, let's listen to his point of view. That's not it. The question at play really here is, why would anyone listen to him? Why would anyone join up to give their life killing people in a war under his influence? What would he say to get them to go along? And this is what he would say: that the American, infidel forces, white Christian forces from the other side of the planet are occupying the Holy Arabian Peninsula, and they're doing so in order to enforce, frankly, a genocidal blockade and bombing campaign against the people of Iraq in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. And that was what recruited people, as well as, Israel's violence. I mentioned in Lebanon and in Palestine, the ringleader hijacker, Mohammed Atta, he was motivated to join al-Qaeda. Him and Ramzi bin al-Shibh and their friends were motivated first and foremost by Operation Grapes of Wrath in 1996, when the Israelis invaded southern Lebanon. And this included what's now called the first, because they did it again 10 years later in 2006, the first Qana massacre, where women and children were killed, 108, I believe, were killed in a UN shelter. And there's, plenty of credible reporting about this, about how Mohammed Atta then, and it may have even been the day before that massacre, actually signed his last will and testament. But then Osama bin Laden invoked the Qana massacre and Operation Grapes of Wrath in his declaration of jihad in 1996. And that at that point, and this is in The Perfect Soldiers by Terry McDermott, at that point, that was when Ramzi bin al-Shibh and Mohammed Atta said, let's go to Afghanistan and meet Osama bin Laden and join up in that group. Because, in their eyes, this was the American people and the American government's responsibility, what the Israelis were doing in Lebanon, which the American people might not have understood, but to them it was very clear. And so this isn't to say that what they would do in targeting American civilian targets, killing 3,000 people, is in any way justified, right? None of this has anything to do with an excuse. The point is that this is the reason that there is a war on. And, the great intelligence beat reporter James Bamford, the way he put it was, and this is what they said, that America was already at war with them, but only by proxy, through their dictatorships that we support, and treat them so unfairly, and through our support for the Israelis, et cetera. And so they wanted to go ahead and reproduce what we had helped them do to the Soviet Union. And that was lure us into Afghanistan, where they could drag us down, bleed us to bankruptcy in, the quicksand, so to speak, of that unforgiving terrain so far from home in such an expensive campaign. And frankly, and I think this is worth pointing out, I like pointing it out, that, again, 1 million people were killed when the Soviets were lured by the United States into fighting these men in the jihad in the 1980s. But to bin Laden, this was acceptable to reproduce that, whatever, let even on quote unquote our side, from his point of view, on their side, let them all die and let God sort them out. Right.
Right.
But at the end of the day, at some point, and there's a letter, published by the Wall Street Journal that was found where bin Laden is saying to Mullah Omar, I'm sorry I got you into this, but trust me, after about 10 years' time, you're going to see that I'm right, that at the end of the day, we will drive them out of here bankrupt and humiliated and their power forever crippled, et cetera, et cetera. And so then, as Michael Scheuer, the former chief of CIA's bin Laden unit, put it, going to Iraq, and then I'm sure he would hasten to add, and to Yemen and Somalia and Libya and Syria. This is all just absolutely the icing on the cake for Osama bin Laden, better than his wildest dream. What he wanted was for Bush to exploit the opportunity to invade Afghanistan. But to invade all these countries and seek all these regime changes on these secular dictators. And of course, they don't want to bring democracy to the dictatorships they control. They just use democracy as the excuse for overthrowing the dictators that they don't. But then what rises in their place except these, Sunni militias loyal to bin Laden, and just spreading bin Ladenite ideology everywhere they go. Because that's, the brand name on resistance to American imperialism. And they've spread, look at the map. They spread his jihad from the eastern border of Afghanistan to 2,000 miles west to Lebanon and Syria. I mean, they're still in Idlib province. There's, the Russians aren't done with them there yet. So, it's absolutely been the greatest strategic boon. And, we started talking about this on the September 11th attacks. Well, you could see, the conspiracy theory that actually the CIA works for al-Qaeda all along, and that George Bush and Barack Obama and Dick Cheney and Hillary Clinton, that these people are the secret agents of Osama. And everywhere they go, it looks like they're cynically taking advantage of a tragedy in order to make a lot of money and increase their power and influence and run their silly sociology experiments and whatever. But actually, they're just doing what Zawahiri wants in order to cripple the American empire permanently and in order to spread bin Ladenite ideals 1,000 miles in every direction, which they have perfectly succeeded in doing. I mean, that's a joke. I didn't really nail the punchline very well, but in terms of like, hey, who benefits? Right. Well, bin Laden. The great anti-war author Jeff Huber wrote an article in 2011 called "Osama bin Laden, Dead and Loving It," and it was about how this guy doesn't care that he's dead. He's perfectly happy to be dead. Look at what he accomplished. Right. He got you to do this and this and this and this for him. He says, eat your heart out, Charlemagne. How do you like them apples, Alexander? Where this guy was able to move entire continental armies across the entire face of the earth, hither and yon, at his beck and command, all from hiding, in the attic from his wife. Right. Way out, in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
Yeah, not too bad.
And so, you and whose army? And the answer is the U.S. Army at bin Laden's beck and call. Right. Get it?
Yep.
So this is, we had a policy in Iraq and a policy in Afghanistan starting in the very late 70s and into the 1980s where, they befriended the tyrant who then got out of control and needed squashing. And they befriended these mujahideen who then got really angry at the squashing we did to the tyrant. And so that's basically the lead up to September 11th. That's what got us into this mess, right? Nothing in there about, they really hate it when you're free and, your daughter can vote in a primary election or this kind of thing. That's just not what their fight was about. Their fight was about, real violence. And, this is what was so important about Ron Paul's campaign in 2007 and 8 especially was – just being perfectly honest about this. As he said in his argument with Rudy Giuliani, where Giuliani tried to bully him and Ron Paul, stood by his claim and elaborated on it. He goes, look, we've been bombing Iraq for 10 years. And he could have said, sort of in brackets there, from bases in Saudi Arabia, right, before they attacked us. That's why they attacked us. Right. And Giuliani goes, well, I've heard a lot of goofy explanations for 9/11, but that one sure takes the cake.
Unthinkable.
Well, really?
Unthinkable.
Yeah. That the 1990s happened. Because I remember Ron Paul, because I've been paying attention to Ron Paul since 1997. And I remember during Bill Clinton's impeachment, that he gave a press conference that I saw on C-SPAN Live, and you can find, it's like classic Ron Paul on YouTube now, where he says he ought to be impeached for our foreign policy. He ought to be impeached for bombing Iraq, which is likely to provoke terrorist attacks. He's likely to cause a war over there and get us attacked by terrorists. Right. That's why we really ought to be removing him from power. But I'll settle for obstruction of justice. It's like, God, what a hero, this guy. I love Ron Paul so much. But anyway, yeah. No, and I remember when that happened. So, that much, it was clear that this was the problem. In fact, in that talk, Ron Paul says, he's referring to whatever lost news story, right? That we just heard this warning from the Saudis the other day. That was like a friendly warning from their government that our bases there are really causing problems for them and possibly could for us,
Hey, Dan Smots here. I'm taking a second to interrupt myself talking to talk about myself because, I don't get paid a penny for the hours and hours that I put into creating this show for you guys in your greedy little ears, and I've got a family to feed. To make that happen, I run my own media business called Goulash Media. If you have a need in anything from video production to graphic design to audio production and beyond, you can get it all for a painfully fair price at Goulash Media. In video, I do weddings, music videos, commercials, pageants, plays, etc., etc., etc. For design, I do photo editing, album art, logos, branding, business cards, merchandise, you name it. For audio, I do engineering, production, editing, jingles, and, podcasts. So if you've got a media need of any kind, or if you'd just like to give a little something back and help keep my children fed, check out all the endless options at my website, goulashmedia.net. That's goulash, Goulash, media.net, where we cater to the little guy with the big vision. Okay. Yeah, I find it's just bizarre that, Giuliani and people act like blowback is not a thing. It's like, when they attacked us on 9/11, what did we do? Right. Why would we expect them not to do the same thing if they had the ability to do so?
Right. And that's the whole thing, is they would just have to admit that it was their fault, both parties.
Right.
And so they just go, okay, well, it's a brand new day. History just began, and now we have to get away with whatever blue bloody murder. So then I guess, section 2 of what I would try to get across to you then, if the first part is this is all Jimmy Carter through Bill Clinton's fault for getting us into this mess, then the second part of this would be the massive, I don't want to say blunder, well, I'll say blunder, but I'll qualify it, the massive blunder of George W. Bush's Iraq War II. Because, let me say very clearly that it was a premeditated murder plot. These guys wanted to invade Iraq, and they absolutely did everything they could to lie us into it. And I could just go on for the rest of the interview about how corrupt that entire process was of even getting us into the damn thing.
Oh, yeah.
However, the blunder about it was that all the promises that had been made – by the neocons especially, about what was to be expected from this war, were just completely off base. And, Bush and them believed it. I think, a big part of this was, we really want to do this. And Paul Wolfowitz says, trust me, it's going to work. It's going to be great. Was like a big part of that. And so, but what actually happened was, well, just like I was saying, when George H.W. Bush called off support for the Shiite uprising in 1991, well, George W. Bush just picked up where the old man left off.
Yeah.
And so what did he do? He imported the Iranian Revolution into Iraq. And so those very same militias, the Badr Brigade especially, and their political parties, the Supreme Islamic Council and the Dawa Party, these were the guys who, when Jimmy Carter hired Saddam to start this war back in 1980, these were the guys who fled to Iran and took Iran's side. Well, here they were coming in to take the dominant position over the Shiite population and as their political representatives under the new American-backed regime. And so when you look at, we talk about Iraq War II and the civil war that happened there, especially in the years, 2005 through 8, that was America fighting on the side outright of that Shiite supermajority to defeat the Sunni-based insurgency, or at least to cleanse, as they call it. It's not ethnic cleansing because they're all Arabs here, but it was the sectarian cleansing of Sunni Arabs from Baghdad, where it had been a very mixed city in proportion, but also in where people live. There were a lot of mixed neighborhoods and mixed marriages and families and this kind of thing. And what ended up happening was virtually all the Sunnis were kicked out. It ended up being like a 90% Shiite city. And so once this had started, there was no way to stop it. I won't get into all the details of what was going on, but once they had started this process, it was basically out of their control. And at that point, it was a contest between America and Iran for who's going to have more influence over this group we're putting in power together here. And the answer was Iran won the race. And there was basically nothing the Americans could do about it. The Shiites didn't really need us. They needed the Iranians and their friends next door, but they didn't really need us. So that was in victory. They said, now, thanks, victory over the Sunnis. They said, now, thanks, you can get the hell out. And that was the deal that Bush signed to leave. Mm-hmm. So the other side of that war, right, was the Sunni insurgency. And the worse the American-backed Shiite forces were in their war against the Sunnis, the worse the Sunni insurgency got. And that included the group al-Qaeda in Iraq, which came into existence a full year and a half after the invasion. It was in the fall of 2004 that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi declared his loyalty to bin Laden and his goals, and called his group al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so this was where, if Bush made a huge blunder in giving the southeast of the country, the most important slice of the country in terms of location and oil wealth and everything else, to Iran's friends in these Shiite parties. Well, he turned the west of the country into jihadi university, basically, into bin Ladenistan, from Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, Tikrit, and all these predominantly Sunni cities had these massive resistance movements that fought like hell for years to maintain their influence over that central government and lost. But then also committed all these suicide attacks and killed all these Shiite civilians and helped, make the civil war that much worse from their side. And this was the group that after Zarqawi was killed in 2006, they renamed themselves the Islamic State of Iraq. And at that point, they failed because they were mostly led by, this is al-Qaeda in Iraq we're talking about, the Islamic State of Iraq. They were mostly, their leadership were made up of a bunch of Saudis and Egyptians and foreigners who were trying to boss the local Sunni Arabs around. And that didn't work. And that was really, part of what caused the Sunnis themselves to defeat the worst edge of their insurgency, the al-Qaeda guys, in exchange for a ceasefire with the Americans. They'd already started turning on them anyway. And then Petraeus accepted a ceasefire between General Petraeus, that is, between American forces and these guys and the Sunni insurgency, the broader Sunni insurgency, as long as they would turn on al-Qaeda. So that was this huge stroke of luck that this massive, terrorist movement, this literal bin Ladenite movement had grown up, but then the local population that it had grown up among thought that they had gone way too far and pulled the rug out from under them and got rid of them for us. Like, talk about, sweat from the forehead wiping kind of situation. What a relief that was. There's nothing America could have done to get rid of them. All they did was make more and more the more they fought them. It was the local Sunnis who rooted them out. But then, so Bush started this in 2006. There's a Seymour Hersh article called The Redirection. And it's about how basically the Bush administration, under the influence of a neocon named Zalmay Khalilzad, basically came to recognize that we really screwed up here. And, we don't have this dominance over the Shia that then we can use to lord over the Iranians like in the deal. Instead, the Iranians lorded over the guys that we've installed in power, and we're kind of really stuck here. So what are we going to do? So the idea was the redirection. We're going to go back to supporting our friends, the Saudis, the leaders of the Sunni axis in the Middle East, and to make it up to them that we empowered their nemesis, Iran, so badly. And so they started supporting jihadi type groups in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iran. And you might have heard of Jandala, who did assassinations and bombings inside Iran in the late Bush years, especially. Yeah. And then, so this is the policy that Obama came and ran with. And this was around the time, right when Obama was killing Osama in 2011, right at that time, he was taking Osama's side in Libya, and then a minute later in Syria as well. And so at that point, now the Sunni insurgency, who had just been the bad guys in Iraq, and in fact, the Al-Qaeda bleeding edge of that Sunni insurgency, the Libyan veterans of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Ansar al-Sharia, these groups came back to Libya from Iraq, and now they're moderate rebels against the dictator Gaddafi. And then the same kind of thing happened in Syria, where the Syrian-dominated branch of Al-Qaeda in Iraq came back across the border and called themselves Jabhat al-Nusra. And Obama and John Brennan and Hillary Clinton and Leon Panetta and David Petraeus called them the moderate rebels and started backing them, because what are they doing? They can't start Iraq War II all over again and kick the Shiites out of Baghdad and give it back to the Sunnis, right? Too late for that, right. George W. Bush. Thanks a lot. So what are we going to do now? How about a consolation prize? We'll get rid of Assad, and that'll bring Iran down a peg. Because even though he's a secularist and a Ba'athist, he's an Alawite, which is, you know, a kind of sort of like a Shia. And it's associated with the Shia in a way, and it's certainly allied with them there and allied with Iran in the region. And Obama told this to Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic, when Jeffrey Goldberg says, and the title is, "As President, I Don't Bluff," if anyone wants to read it. And Jeffrey Goldberg says, hey, if we get rid of Assad, this would be a great way to bring Iran down a peg, don't you think? And this is in the spring of 2012. And Obama says, that's right, Jeffrey Goldberg, and that's exactly why we're doing it. And Goldberg says, well, can anything more be done to help do this? And he says, well, you know, I could tell you what we're doing, but your security clearance isn't high enough, right? I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you, because the answer is he's committing treason. He's got the CIA backing the guys who we just called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And hell, we still had troops in Iraq at the time. And in fact, at the time, there was still a low-level insurgency, including some Islamic State of Iraq guys who are still fighting. They're still the bad guys in Iraq at the exact same time. They're already being rehabilitated as the moderate rebels in Syria, as long as they're fighting against the Shiite axis. That, again, the only reason we're so mad at the Shiite axis is, one, they overthrew our dictator back in 79, but two, George Bush gave them Baghdad. So now we're really mad at them for that. Right. And so it sounds crazy. I know sounds crazier than Cheney was in on 9/11 to me, but I know that it's true, is that John Brennan and Barack Obama backed Al-Qaeda in Syria for years. It wasn't until, beginning in 2011, and it wasn't until the spring of 2013 that the Islamic State of Iraq split off, really al-Nusra, the Syrian branch, split off from the Islamic State of Iraq, which, again, they've been calling themselves that since 2006, right? Yeah. They weren't the new phenomenon. What was new was that when the Syrian branch broke off from the Iraqi branch, they stayed loyal to Ayman al-Zawahiri. But the Iraqi branch decided, now that bin Laden is dead, there's an argument against your decapitation strike strategy right here. Right. Is they got rid of Osama, and now the new guy, Omar Bakr al-Baghdadi, decided he didn't need to obey Ayman al-Zawahiri of Al-Qaeda, that he could now just do whatever he wanted and declare a caliphate. And he did. He claimed not just eastern Syria, but then 1 year later in early June of 2014, he rolled right in and sacked all of western Iraq. Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, and Tikrit all fell. Basiji, or whatever, this town that had all the oil refinery, they took all that. They killed tens and tens of thousands of innocent people. They seized a land the size of Great Britain, and a population to boot. They had conscription and taxation, and I mean, they really pulled it off as the direct result of American support for their efforts against Assad in Syria. And also the fact that the surge in Iraq did not work, and the Sunnis and the Shia, they might have had a ceasefire with us, but they never really worked out their differences after we left. And the predominantly Shiite government had not really extended much authority over those predominantly Sunni areas. It was basically a foreign country already by that point. And so the Islamic State had no problem rolling right in and seizing all of western Iraq. And then that necessitated the launch then of Iraq War III, which Obama launched in the summer of 2014, and which only wrapped up, basically 9 months ago, right? Like last fall. where they finally got, rousted the last of these guys out of Mosul and Raqqa. That's in western Iraq and in eastern Syria, and all at the cost of another, few 100,000 lives. And guess what? Again, of course, right, taking the side of the Shiite militias in Iraq, Iran's friends, the Shiite militias and the Iraqi army that we allied with, again, to roust the Islamic State out of these predominantly Sunni areas. Well, so now you won't be surprised to know and to hear, and you'll hear it all the time, that now something's really got to be done about Iran. Oh, by the way, I left out about how Iran was called, along with the Russians and Hezbollah, to come and help Assad and protect Assad from the CIA's Al-Qaeda guys. Right. And that's exactly what they did. So now Iran has a much more powerful presence in Syria than they ever had before, as blowback from, direct consequences from Obama's war for these Sunni insurgents to take them out. So now they want to pretend that, oh, my God, look, everybody, history just began again. And never mind anything that just happened, Carter through Obama. No, never mind any of this. That now all that matters is, did you hear Iran is more powerful than ever in Iraq? And they're more powerful than ever in Syria? Mm-hmm. And I heard an unsubstantiated rumor that they're behind the Houthi, victory over the Saudis' puppets in Yemen 3 years ago. And so now they pretend, and in fact, just today, Daniel Larison has a great write-up at the American Conservative Magazine on his blog there about a new piece by Fred Kagan, who was one of the guys who was behind the surge in support of the Shiite side in the Civil War in Iraq War II. And now he's the one saying, he is Robert Kagan's brother here, and he's saying that, and Robert Kagan being one of the ringleaders who got us into Iraq War II in the first place, I should say. Sure. And now here's his brother Fred, again, calling for escalation, pretending it's a brand new day, and saying Iran has all this increased influence, that they've been, winning this sectarian war that his own family started. And then, so this is why we now really must figure out a way to change the regime in Tehran, which of course could lead to a much worse regional war. And these guys are just absolutely hell-bent, and they'll never admit that it's their fault. They'll never even blame each other. They'll only blame the outsiders and, the foreigners on the other side of the scope. And that's it. There's no responsibility. There's no accountability for what they've done and how they've got us all into this mess, how they've been heeding Osama and the Ayatollah all this time at the expense of the people of the Middle East and the expense of the people of the USA. That they're the most irresponsible world leaders since, I don't know, the Kaiser, or worse. I don't know. Yeah, okay, Hitler. But, yeah, they're really bad. They make Ronald Reagan look like the greatest of geniuses or something. It's completely and it's so immoral. And they get away with just saying, well, geez, we were trying to do the right thing. And it's crazy to think that, dress up this level of killing and irrational violence leading to these, horrifying ends and just say, well, it was good intentions and we were, maybe we'll learn our lesson next time. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think the American people are ready to call it quits on all of this stuff, victory or not, which
you would think so.
Be.
You would think so.
Yeah, I mean, and I think they do feel that way, but they don't demand it, not yet. So,
right. Yeah, I feel like most people don't. If they pay a little bit of attention, they want it to stop. But I feel like a lot of people don't pay attention, don't care, and don't realize everything that's like. I mean, I say that, but I don't know everything that's going on, obviously. But they don't even realize like all the different places that we're at war with at the moment, or that we're even still at war with Afghanistan. I don't think most people give a crap.
Right. Well, and I mean that's the whole thing. Is the plan is to bleed us to bankruptcy. Right. I don't think, it's pretty hard to find empires that decided to go ahead and withdraw their forces before they were completely bankrupt. Right. Certainly everything is set up here where, it's a dirty snowball rolling downhill, if you like that one, or a self-licking ice cream cone. That's what the military calls it, where all these things are, it's like begging the question, literally, where every order of tanks is a justification for itself. Why would we be doing these things if it wasn't necessary? So that's all we need. That's the only evidence we need that is necessary, is that this is how we do it. And we just keep going on. Mm-hmm. And so Yeah, it would take, I don't know what superstar or what, musician, what politician, what retired general, what, coalition of corporate forces, what anyone could stop the empire now.
Right.
I just, when finally, as Ron Paul would say, eventually people will give up on their confidence in the dollar. And then that'll be, all she wrote. Yeah. But I don't know how long that's going to take, but it's pretty horrible to imagine that it would be the better outcome, that would come sooner than later. But it kind of looks like it, because things really could be a lot worse. Like I was saying, if real war broke out with Iran, it would be a huge one. It would be a massive conventional campaign. It would escalate and escalate. They might say, oh, we want some limited airstrikes or something. But once that thing starts, it's getting out of control. And we have so many forces over there trying to dominate their region that they're within range. They have no offensive force that could ever mess with us here in North America. But as long as we have all of our stuff within range in Afghanistan, in Kuwait, and in Iraq, and Oman, and Qatar, and Bahrain, and Saudi right there, then they can nail us. Which, of course, would just mean escalation dominance. So, yeah, you can't hit back at us in a war. Your job is to sit there and take it. And if you dare hit back, then we're going to hit back against you this much harder. And that's just going to escalate and escalate.
Right.
I mean, that could get way out of control. And I'm not really predicting it. I think that the president doesn't really want a real war with Iran. But I know that everybody who works for him is absolutely horrible on it. And, the Israelis have never been more belligerent on it either. And so I don't know. They got us out of the deal, which was working great. Well, it really was a good deal. It was the best thing Obama ever did, was that nuclear deal with Iran. And it locked down their nuclear program beyond all reason. And we're just doing everything. Our government is now doing everything we can to deprive them of any incentive to stay in their end of the deal and to start escalating their nuclear program again, which has always been a civilian program. But without this deal, I think it really can, even falsely, it can be used to serve as a fake reason for war, a pretended threat of a nuclear bomb there to preempt. And that's been the narrative they've tried to push for a long time. And I could imagine Donald Trump going for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you said at the beginning, the deal in Afghanistan, we're not told why we're there, really. What is the narrative behind that they're pushing out there? Like, why are we still there after all this time? What is the point?
Well, all they have left is the safe haven myth. And that is that, because the people who ultimately were behind the September 11th attack were living in Afghanistan.
Right.
Bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and their few lieutenants there. In fact, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was in Pakistan, and the plot was hatched all over the place, including in Spain, including inside the United States, in Malaysia, in Germany, where the ringleader pilots, most of them were all friends living in Hamburg and this kind of thing. So the safe haven never really had anything to do with it. And if you look at a globe, you'll see that Afghanistan is exile. The Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan is literally as far as away as you can get from anywhere without being on the other side and coming back this way again. To pretend that that this is a magic porthole to Boston Logan Airport and access to American jetliners to crash into the United States again, some kind of thing like that. It doesn't comport with anyone's set of facts about what happened on 9/11. Those were domestic flights hijacked here. And crashed into those buildings. And so, this has always kind of, been hollow on the face of it. But more to the point, there haven't been any Al-Qaeda guys in Afghanistan this whole time. I make the case in the book that Bush, made at best a half-hearted effort to bomb them, but refused to commit forces on the ground that were available, Marines as well as Green Berets and Rangers who could have come to back up the Delta Force and the CIA paramilitary forces there at Tora Bora, and who were denied permission to go and to help even when they wanted to. But regardless of that, in any case, a few hundred of them were killed and less than 100 of them escaped. And, many of those were eventually arrested by the Pakistani police and turned over to the U.S. anyway. And so there was always just this minuscule number of, original friends of Osama bin Laden from back in 2001 who were even in Pakistan. And then so the threat has been the safe haven myth. If they come to Afghanistan, then all the magic spells will be broken or something, and they will be able to attack the United States from there. Well, but then Obama came in, and I'm not giving him credit for this, but I think, it is just descriptive and not normative, that he waged this drone war in Pakistan that apparently really got rid of the last few. Again, it was very few men. But these last few Arab allies of Osama bin Laden were killed in these drone attacks in the tribal territories there. And I'm not saying it was worth it, because the cost was incredibly high for the people of the Swat Valley and the northern federally administered tribal territories there. It was really brutal what was done. But apparently they really did kill off the last of these guys there. And then that's it. So safe haven for who? Right. And now the Taliban have said for years and years and years, and the Taliban didn't attack us on September 11th. Al-Qaeda did. And the Taliban have said for years and years that, hey, we learned from our mistake on that, guys. Okay, we're not going to ever let Al-Qaeda come back. You can, if that's what you need to hear to get out of our country, then we can assure you of that. And no international terrorism will be based out of here again. And so I'm not saying their promises are golden, but I'm saying that's something we can work with. And instead what we have is we're bogged down fighting local Pashtun tribesmen who are, screaming, get the hell off of my lawn in Pashto. And we're pretending that they are international terrorists who hate us and attacked us, and we have to defend America from them. That's just a lie. It's just not true. They never did anything to us other than, they killed our guys who were on their land, where it's our officers and our politicians' fault for putting them there. That's the deal. And in fact, right now you have a faction of, again, just local Pashtun tribesmen who, and I guess many of them Pakistanis, but they're local as hell compared to us anyway. You're talking about the difference between Dallas and Houston or something.
Right.
And so these guys come and they call themselves the Islamic State. So now, never mind mythical Egyptians and Saudis still hiding somewhere in Pakistan who can come to be the safe haven myth fulfilled. Now, local Pashtun tribesmen with AK-47s are considered ISIS, the scariest brand of Al-Qaeda yet, right? Even though the Islamic State doesn't even exist anymore now that we're at the end of Iraq War III. We're really in Iraq War III.5 now. Keep track. Still fighting an insurgency there. But now that the Islamic State itself is gone, they call themselves ISIS. And they're, probably supported by the Pakistani intelligence services anyway, just to, keep things interesting over there and keep prevent the Taliban from coming to a deal with the Afghan government or the Americans, because there's this other card in play all the time with this third force fighting. But anyway, the point is that it's not really a threat. It's only a threat in their rhetoric, right? There's the Pakistani Taliban has only committed one attack against the United States, and it failed, luckily. And this was the Times Square attempt in 2010. And this was not a FBI frame-up job. This was a legit thing where this guy, traveled to Pakistan. He lived here. He's an American citizen. But he traveled to Pakistan to visit relatives, and he saw the results of a drone strike, and he volunteered, hey, I can get in behind the line and do an attack there. And that was the only time that the Pashtuns ever of Pakistan or Afghanistan ever tried to launch an attack outside of their country. And again, I'm not saying it's justified, but I'm just saying, it was clearly tit for tat in a war, right? A war that, it's not right that that he would do such things, try to bomb Times Square, but it's not right either that we get to have a war wherever we want, but you're not ever allowed to fight back. Yeah. That's kind of not really the thing. And in fact, as long as I'm on this tangent, this guy's name was Faisal Shahzad, and he pleaded guilty and went to prison. He's gone to prison for life. But in his sentencing statement, he, had a back and forth with the judge and said, this is a war and you bomb my people. And so I, signed up to take part in our side of the war. And the judge says, yeah, but here you're in Times Square, you're bombing women and children. And he says, yeah, but judge, the drones, they don't see women and children. They bomb everybody. They bomb women and children. Do you think that they don't? Because they do. And that's why I did it. Is because exactly for that. Don't you understand? And the judge is like, I don't care. I don't know what you're talking about. But, it's plain English, even though it's kind of broken English. It's pretty clear what is going on here, And that's, I call that backdraft, where if blowback is the consequences of long-term secret foreign policies that Americans don't understand and take them by surprise, like September 11th, well, then backdraft is when your overt interventions blow up right in your face.
Right.
And this is what happens when you're bombing somebody's country. They try to bomb you back. You see? And just like you said, well, what do they think is our response to September 11th? We blew back against them, didn't we? And of course, that was actually the angle that Osama was playing again, trying to, knowing that he could get a reaction. In fact, in the book, I quote his son, saying that when Bush was elected, my father was so happy that this is basically the perfect mark. This is a guy, this pretend tough guy, who's going to, and corrupt as well, on the very face of it, in all of his republicanism. That this is a guy who will exploit and take advantage of the crisis to get away with blue bloody murder, and that's what Osama bin Laden wanted to see. Right. Just like in his letter to Mullah Omar, give it 10 years. Even if you and I are both dead, trust me, this is going to eventually work out in our favor over the long haul. And that was exactly what they were going for. It's exactly what our side gave them.
Now, what does it take to get out of this, hole that we're constantly digging over and over again?
Well, I kind of think we should go back in time and make Ron Paul the president back in 08.
Okay,
or
time
better,
travel
back
aside.
In 1988. If that's not one of our answers, you're being very unfair to me. Listen, well, the Ron Paul answer was we just marched in, we could just come home.
Right.
And that is call it off. And that's how I write it in my book too, is I don't say, listen, we need to negotiate with the Taliban, because I don't trust either side to negotiate in good faith in any reasonable period of time to make a good enough deal to end it. But you know what? So what? So just go and let it work out the way it's going to work out. My hope would be that the Taliban would refrain from sacking the capital city, and that they could just be happy with the east and south of the country if they were provided some real autonomy. And then maybe it would be a bit of an experiment to see whether the group calling themselves the government in Kabul could hold it together at all to be the government of the North or something like that. I mean, a very loose federal type structure is the best it's ever going to get over there in terms of stability and security that anyone could hope for. And so, we'd like to see them work it out. Then again, the whole thing is like a big stock market bubble, right? Or a big, economic bubble driven by, guess what? Paper money.
Right.
And in this case, this giant government program diverting all this wealth into propping up this government. And so there's a crash coming. And they have a lot more power, quote unquote, artificially at the hands of American assistance and subsidy that they just can never manage on their own. Our budget for their government is virtually equal to their entire GDP. Right.
Yeah.
So that's not an equation for long-term success. Something's going to have to give there.
Right.
And my answer is, you know what? You shouldn't have invaded. You shouldn't have propped up this government there. You shouldn't have blown all this smoke about building a modern, Western democracy and all this stuff in the heart of Central Asia, or about the importance of dominating Central Asia to keep the countries of Central Asia from dominating themselves. It's just the whole policy is completely wrongheaded and not worth it. And all those men did die in vain. I mean, in the broad sense anyway, in terms of policy, it was all wrong all along. Should be okay to admit that. I mean, a lot of them died bravely defending each other and that kind of thing in heroic war story sense. But that's besides the point that we're talking about here. It just wasn't worth it. They never should have gone. And, there should have been, and there should still be, accountability for the people who have done this. And that goes for the generals in charge and of course the politicians and all the think tankers, all the Kagans and all their policy papers. These people are guilty of war crimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So hypothetically, you would say pull out, but realistically, what would you predict the future to be if you had to put money on it in this situation?
Well, I mean, in the case of just the Afghan war, it really could go on like this forever, where, we have forces in in other words, the status quo, more or less, which is a horrible one. It's not a peaceful one or a stable one, but it's sort of like there's vicious fighting on the Western Front, but the line doesn't move very far. You know what I mean? So I don't mean to say like it's relative peace over there. It's not that. But you have American forces, embedded hard at bases at Bagram and then down in the Helmand province, where they have enough firepower to fend off any attacker. They can basically stay in what amounts to these imperial forts forever if they want. They have a severe amount of defensive firepower to protect those bases. And the Taliban don't seem to want to seize cities for other than, demonstration purposes. Occasionally, they'll seize the city of Kunduz for a couple of weeks and then withdraw. We saw in the last week they seized I'm sorry, I'm spacing on the name. Ghazni province there, just south of the capital of Kabul, and they seized that for 3 days and killed a few hundred people, a lot of government fighters and all that, and then withdrew because they can't hold on to these fixed positions because eventually the B-1s are going to come. But it takes about 3 days for them to get their act together, apparently. So once the B-1s come with their, carpet bombing, then the Taliban withdraw and live to fight another day. But so, they rule Pashtunistan except for the provincial capitals, the predominantly Pashtun regions, and then including up in the north of the country. They've, exercised a lot of power and influence up there. So, I think if the Americans were to, I think basically, to try to answer your question, I think that Trump can't win and he knows it. And he's being told that if he leaves and pulls out, then it'll be his failure and his fault and that kind of thing, which I don't think he should go for. I mean, I think it'd be so easy to just blame this on Bush and Obama, right, and say, you know what, I even tried for a year to make up for their failure, but it's just going to be too expensive to tie up these loose ends. We just can't do it. Right. That would be a perfect exit for him. No problem at all. But he's being told that he can't. He's being told, the example is, we'll see Obama, never mind Bush signed it and had to, but Obama pulled the troops out of Iraq. And then the Islamic State came. When, remember, the rest of the story is Obama took the Islamic State side in Syria. And that was what led to the rise of the Islamic State. It didn't have to be that way. It wasn't just because they pulled troops out. I guess it's true that if a lot of troops had been left there, that they would have been able to fend off the Islamic State when they were marching on Mosul. But, I don't know, not necessarily, depending on how many. And the Iraqis wouldn't have it. And they always left that part out. But the political lesson is the important one, right? The political lesson is if you pull troops out of anywhere, then anything bad that happens there after you do so is all your fault for pulling the troops out. Now, anything bad that happens while your troops are there, well, geez, that's just despite our, best efforts to create peace and democracy and what have you and stability and too bad. But, hey, at least we're trying. Right. Right. But if you pull out, then, oh, look what happens when you gave up, someone else died. And so under that political framing, I think it just makes sense for Trump. And his cost is basically nothing among the population. And now, on the other hand, he'd be Trump the Great for at least a day if he called the whole thing off, right? He could score major points for calling it off and saying, enough of this. Don't you agree, everyone? And everyone would go, yeah, we agree. And it would be great, right? Everyone outside of D.C. Would cheer for that, and it would be a great political win. But on the other hand, just staying means, one less fight with the political establishment and something that the American people really aren't too, obsessed with or upset about as it stands, short of a major crisis. In fact, look at what happened in Ghazni. We had a Tet Offensive style massive thing go on in Ghazni there, and nobody even took any notice of it outside of, the nationalinterest.org or whatever. No one else even noticed or cared. It's a Tet Offensive, but a complete PR failure, Right. So, yeah. But now, on the other hand, I think if Trump did leave and just said, forget this, man, and you know what, I didn't vote for it, so it never was my fault, and now I'm getting out of here. Yeah. Then I think that, possibly there'd be a civil war that would break out and be worse for a time, but maybe not. And I think that really, at this point, that's not that shouldn't be a deciding factor in staying or leaving now. Because again, as I'm saying, whatever crisis is due to come, it's because of the distortions of power that American influence there has made. And so those checks just got to get cashed at some point,
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, there could be negotiation. I'm not just saying write them off and let them all die or whatever. I think there's absolutely room for, hey, how about you guys rule your hometowns and we'll rule ours, and let's leave each other alone and try to draw soft borders here, not hard ones, that leave people stuck on the wrong side. But, can't we all just get along? And you know what? There's a huge peace movement breaking out in Afghanistan right now, and all different tribal factions, people coming together to say we have just absolutely had it with this. Yeah. All sides, just stop the fighting. Wherever the line is now, let it be. This kind of attitude, they've really had it. And so, we should, I think, just call it quits and let these things play out.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, man. Sounds pretty reasonable and rational to me, but that's not what we do. So I'm curious, for you, I mean, you're a well of knowledge. Obviously, I've asked about 3 questions in the last hour, which is fantastic, and that's the thing I love about your book too. The way you go through these happenings in history is just, it's basically like telling a story. This is what happened. This happened. This happened. This happened. It all makes sense. I'm curious as to like where you go for your information, because it's almost impossible to find any credible information on these topics these days.
Antiwar.com.
Okay.
And it ain't just me. I'm just the opinion editor there. Sure. But I'm curating all the best anti-war opinion pieces every day. And Jason Ditz does the world's most important job at news.antiwar.com with news summaries of all the most important stories of the day and a bit of context at least. There's short little summaries, but he's always like, remember last week when they said it was this or whatever. It's got it in there. Yeah. And I think just like with anything, honestly, man, any new job you get or any new interest that you take up, you work real hard at it for a little while and it becomes pretty easy. And you start to see, even reading the New York Times, that some reporters are better than others. Some of them ask, more, questions along the lines of what you want to know, and some of them don't. And you'll start to be able to tell real easy between what to take seriously and what not, what kind of claim seems to fit really conveniently with somebody else's agenda versus, when someone's really admitting a truth against interest. Like when the CIA says that Iran isn't making nukes, you can take that to the bank. If they say they are, then you should say, no, screw you. That's, I don't believe you. Prove it at least. Right. But so anybody can do that. It's just a matter of putting the work in. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just a matter of just like you learn anything else. And you'll notice who your friends are in the media. For me, a lot of my very best sources are leftists, because most of the people who are against America's imperial foreign policy are leftists. So, sometimes there's a little bit of a gentle kind of nudging back and forth about economic type stuff on the show, but almost not really. The vast majority of the time I put all that stuff aside and we just argue, all other things being equal and not in dispute. Not every topic is about anarcho-capitalism and how everything should be my way in utopia or whatever. I interviewed Bruce Fine today, and he's a constitutional lawyer. So that's the context of the discussion, is just how extra legal all this is and illegal all this is and the way that they do it and that kind of thing. So and you know what? That's my real cheat, which I should admit, that not only do I read all this stuff all the time, but I get to interview the authors of all this stuff all the time. So I get to ask them whatever I want that I don't understand and make them elaborate. So, and I've been doing this for a lot of years now in a row. So that's, really where I get all this stuff, is that I've been covering it day in and day out this whole time. Yeah. And trying to have my 2 cents and trying, as you said, to tell it in a story where people have the context. Right? Where here you and I are talking about Jimmy Carter, but it's not about some, ridiculous side point we want to make about him. It's about what's his role in our current story. Why does it matter that he was ever the president at all? Kind of thing. And what I like to think, you said, whoa, that's a lot to take in and that kind of, I like to think that at least maybe on the second listen that, most people know a lot of this stuff. right? Or at least a major portion of it,
Sure.
right? It's not like I'm breaking a story that Saddam was, successful in a coup in 79 and then made quick friends with the Reaganites, right? This is not a secret scandal.
Sure.
It's just, I'm just sort of providing, hopefully, for you, like where that fits on the timeline and why it matters for what came later. And then so there ought to just, I hope, be a lot of like, okay, now I get it, why this influenced that or how this influenced that in a way that I hope will be helpful. And, it's just like you asked me at the beginning, the most important narrative to me is about getting into this mess. They didn't hate us because of our innocence. Mm-hmm. It was something else. If we get that part right, then the question is, so what are we doing about it? And then, of course, the answer is, well, we're making it a whole lot worse and benefiting all the people that we say we hate and fear the most. And so, let's just stop doing all of it. Seems to be a pretty easy answer,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Very well said. And would you be down to do a little bit extra? I'd like to pick your brain on some of the conspiracy stuff a little bit more for some bonus for our listeners, if you're down.
Yeah, whatever you say, man.
Cool. Well, before we go, Scott, thanks so much for being here. Let everybody know where they can find out more information about you, Fool's Errand, your other book, which is, we didn't get into, Lords of Secrecy, right?
No, that's the other Scott Horton.
Oh.
He is he's a managing editor at Harper's Magazine and a professor of law at Columbia University, and that's a great book.
Okay.
Lords of Secrecy. And he's a lot more credentialed foreign policy guy.
Well, at least it's not like somebody who's like preaching a completely different set of ideologies.
Yeah, no, he's good. He's good on all Middle East stuff.
There you go. So
and he's a good guy.
So you can just take credit for it if people want to give it to you. So
yeah, there you go. But so I'm Fool's Errand is my book, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and then scotthorton.org is my show. My podcast feed is there, and I've got 4,700 something interviews there going back to 2003. And then I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com and the managing director of the Libertarian Institute with Sheldon Richman.
Awesome.
And that's at libertarianinstitute.com or .org. Yeah.
Awesome. Great stuff, man. I really appreciate you coming on, and you are more than welcome to come back anytime you want. Just let me know.
Great. Happy to do it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Hey, guys. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Scott. I certainly did. Scott's a great guy. He's very fascinating, and he's just a big ball of knowledge. And I'll be completely honest. If you listen to that and you're like, wow, a lot of that was over my head, I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to it. I've listened to it twice now, and I'm still like, whew. What are you talking about, man? There's so much there that a lot of it does go over my head. But I'm just a big old dummy. I'm just a big old dummy who still believes in the conspiracy side of things on 9/11, to be completely honest. But Scott and I talked about all that stuff. We talked about the conspiracy stuff. We recorded a full hour bonus episode for you guys. Basically a whole second episode of the show where we dug into the conspiracy side of things, the September 11th stuff, the Osama bin Laden stuff. We even got into the Oklahoma City bombing and much, much more. And Scott just is a big well of information. So if you want to hear the full second episode with Scott, just go over to patreon.com/The System Is Down and join the Downers Club for as little as $5 a month, and you'll be able to get that. And you'll also be generously supporting the show, and you'll get bonus episodes of the show all the time, all the freaking time, including the Anti-News Live after party on Monday nights. So go over there, check that out, support the show, do yourself a service in making this show a bigger and better listening and viewing experience for yourself. And if you have anything you would like to add to the conversation, you can call into the show at 309-716-3818 and leave a voicemail. Or you can go over to the System Is Down forum at tsidpod.com/forum. So go check that out. It's a fun group of weirdos that like to chat about all these uncomfortable topics together. And it's a lot of fun. We have civil debates and some back and forth stuff, and sometimes we just post random nonsense because, life is too short to spend the whole thing arguing on Facebook. So go check that out, tsidpod.com/forum, and all the links to all this stuff will be in the show notes and the show description, so if you need that, go check that out. And do all the liking, sharing, subscribing, and what have you on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all the places, all the things. iTunes, leave us a nice, happy 5-star review. Help get the word out there. Those are completely free things that you can do to get this show into more eyes and ears. So do all of that. And of course, as always, please go out and have a uncomfortable, respectful conversation with somebody that you disagree with this week. A face-to-face, real-life conversation, because conversations are a dead art form. They're dead. They're dead. Let's revive them. I say it every week because that's the whole point of this show. The point is to prove that we can have these conversations about these taboo topics, these things that you're not supposed to talk about, and we can do so respectfully, not name-calling, not screaming, not whatever, not assuming that the person on the other side of the table is your enemy. That person that you disagree with is not your mortal enemy. They're not, and we need to stop feeling like they are, because there are mortal enemies in the world, and there's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of darkness in the world. And if we can have one conversation, clear one thing up for one person or for ourselves, and try and figure out this life together, I think there's value in that. So keep that in mind as you're going through your week. And tune in to the Anti-News. As of this recording, I'm not completely sure if we're doing it tonight on Labor Day or if we're going to be doing it tomorrow night, but rest assured there will be a live Anti-News broadcast. If you would like to make sure you're up to date on when we're going live, go subscribe to us on YouTube and turn on the notifications and all that stuff. All right, well, I'd say that's enough rambling for me here at the end. I love you guys. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I appreciate it more than you know. And if you'll have me, of course, I will be here first thing next Monday morning, nestled safely in your ears with some more uncomfortable conversations for you. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, question everything and stay uncomfortable. Thanks. This has been a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.